All right, let's talk about something that, let's be honest, probably hits a little too close to home for a lot of us: procrastination. Today, we're going to get into the real story of why we do it, and more importantly, how we can actually stop. Ready to break that cycle? Let's dive in.
You know that feeling, right? You've got that big project, that deadline is just looming, and for some reason, getting started feels like pushing a boulder uphill. Well, if that sounds familiar, you are definitely not alone. Not even close.
In fact, a 2022 survey from Studiosity found that a whopping 78% of students say they struggle with procrastination. So let's just get this straight from the get-go. This isn't some personal failing or a weird character flaw. It's an incredibly common, very human thing. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the procrastination trap. Then we'll get into the data with the science of the spiral. After that, we'll check out a really powerful solution in rewiring your brain, and we'll finish up by giving you your action toolkit. Okay, first things first, we have to bust the biggest myth out there about procrastination. It has nothing to do with being lazy. Seriously, putting things off is usually a sign that you're feeling overwhelmed, not that you just don't care. And that same Studiosity survey, it pointed right to the real culprit: stress. See, when a task makes us feel stressed, our brain's knee-jerk reaction is to just avoid it. It's a quick fix to feel better right now, but man, does it create a way bigger problem down the road. So where's all that stress coming from? Well, for students like Rory in one case study, it's like a perfect storm. You're juggling a bunch of different classes. You've got massive exams on the horizon. You're trying to figure out your entire future, and on top of all that, your brain is just plain tired. No wonder avoidance starts to look like a pretty good option. But how does that feeling of stress spiral into a full-blown habit? Well, it's not just in our heads. There's actual data that shows how our modern lives, and especially our relationship with our devices, just pours fuel on this fire. Researchers even have a name for it: academic procrastination. And what's so fascinating about this definition from the iOS Journal is that it specifically calls out the role of digital devices. Our phones, our laptops, they're incredible tools, but they're also world-class distraction machines. And this study didn't just hint at a connection. It found a powerful, statistically proven one. The more we compulsively check our phones, the more likely we are to put off our schoolwork. And it makes perfect sense, right? Our brain gets a tiny, satisfying hit of dopamine from a social media notification, which feels a whole lot better than starting paragraph 1 of a 10-page essay. And here's where that spiral really starts to get vicious. The research also found another super strong link. The more you procrastinate, the worse you sleep. You put off work, which means you have to stay up later to get it done, which creates stress, which, well, you get it. Good luck getting quality rest with all that going on. And just look at the data. It paints such a clear picture of this trap. In research, correlation numbers on a scale from 0 to 1 are a big deal, and these are incredibly high: a 0.85 correlation between phone use and procrastination, and an almost perfect 0.923 between phone use and bad sleep. These three things are feeding each other in a really destructive loop. So, how in the world do we break out of this cycle? Well, it turns out we can actually retrain our brains, and this brings us to a really proven approach called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Think of it as a practical toolkit for changing patterns that aren't working for you. The core idea of CBT is actually pretty simple, but is so powerful. It's that our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions are all connected. The thoughts you have about a project directly influence how you feel about it, and those feelings are what drive you to either do it or, go watch another cat video. The best part, if you can change just one of those things, like your thoughts, you can change the whole outcome. So here's a perfect example. This is a core CBT technique called cognitive restructuring. It's all about catching that automatic negative thought, that little voice in your head that says, "This is way too hard," and then consciously, actively replacing it with something more realistic and helpful. You're not trying to trick yourself. You're just shifting your focus from this huge, scary mountain to one single manageable step. You're basically changing the story, and that changes everything. Okay, let's move on to the really practical stuff. Theory is great, but what can you actually do, like right now, to start breaking this habit? This is your action toolkit. This 4-step plan is your foundation. First, since we know overwhelm is the enemy, you have to break that huge task into tiny, bite-sized pieces. Second, and this is so important, motivation follows action, not the other way around.
Don't wait to feel like it, just schedule 10 minutes and start. Third, you gotta practice that thought reframing we just talked about. And finally, you have to reward yourself for any progress, no matter how small. That's how you reinforce the new good habit. And from there, you can start to fine-tune your approach. Figure out what works for your learning style. Be really intentional about your phone. Maybe that means putting it in another room for a while. And please, practice some self-compassion. Remember that 78% stat? Beating yourself up just adds more stress to the pile. And finally, don't go it alone. Ask a mentor or a parent to help keep you on track. Now, this isn't going to be an overnight miracle cure, but you can see change happen way faster than you might think. Remember Rory? He saw a 30% jump in his focus in just 2 weeks. By the end of the semester, his grades were way up. It's all about using these small, consistent steps to build momentum that leads to really big results. So let's end with this, because this quote from the Calibrate Ed article just perfectly sums up the whole shift in thinking we've been talking about. When you start to see procrastination as a challenge you can solve with the right tools instead of some kind of moral failure, that's the first and honestly the most important step to breaking the cycle for good.